Filipino farmers are one of the most basic and simple workers in the country. They work harder than most high-paying jobs, yet their wages don't seem to complement their effort. This figure is about the daily wage rate of farmers from the start of the Marcos regime to the last term. There seems to be no pattern and therefore not stationary and have least to no predictable outcome. The time series shows the drastic irregular changes in the industry. Rice and corn farmers seems to correlate with each other, making their time series almost have the same pattern, with also the same significant drop in wage rates that started from 1968 to 1974 but have a significant increase in the next year, and so another drop of rates was observed. From the first year of the Marcos regime up to his last year, a drastic drop in the wage rate for these two farmers is observed. Other farmers such as sugarcane farmers and coconut farmers also felt these serious changes. These two farmers seem to not collide with each other for some obvious reason that they are practically different products. Both farmers also felt changes in wage rates from 1970 to 1977 and also felt the same drop-off of rates from 1980, which is also the events of martial law. Although coconut farmers' wage rate increased by 1981, its counterpart farmer felt the opposite. But after that, both farmers suffered the same decrease in wage rates during the Marcos regime. All rates changed somewhere between 1968 to 1970, and most of these changes are wage drops. Only for the coconut farmers increased. Although there are some increases in wage rates somewhere in the era, all of them have the same ending by the end of the administration, and that is having a lower wage rate that is then hard to regain.
During the 1960s up to the declaration of martial law, the Philippine economy was primarily agricultural with a huge part of the labor force. In this figure, we can see the percentage of both employed labor force work and their daily wage rate yearly from Marcos regime up to the end of his dictatorial era. From the year 1965, it seems that the two are slightly correlated because they have almost the same pattern. In the first quarter of Marcos's regime, the daily wage rate is gradually rising from 100% to 113% to 114%, and the percentage of the employed labor force is from 100% to 109% and reached 110%, but then dropped to 98% from the year 1967 to 1968, even though if the rate of the daily wage is still high until the daily wage rate drops at its lowest rate at 65% in 1974. Since 1968, the percentage of the employed labor force has risen up to the second quarter and continuously rising up to 179% and reached its peak in 1986. There seems to be no pattern at all, so therefore, there is no predictable outcome. It is very obvious that there are many rate wage drops, then the percentage of the employed labor force that has only one, and then continuously increasing until the last term of Marcos's regime.
Because of the nature of employment needs in food manufacturing and eating and drinking facilities, food consumers would be the most sensitive to potentially increased pricing from a higher minimum wage. Furthermore, because of food expenditures plays a larger role in the budget of lower income households, a minimum wage increase may have a greater impact on the consumers. It was intended to aid if food prices rise sufficiently. It appears better in 1960s and 1970s because agriculture wage rates were greater than food prices, implying that the foods at that time were much cheaper than they are now. As indicated in the graph, agricultural wage rate have not increased as much as food prices during the 1970s. And beginning in 1970, food prices began to rise steadily, while wage rates continued to fall. So, how did people fund these basic needs back then? Perhaps they provided their needs from borrowing money. Folks at that time were working tirelessly, and perhaps some of them will go abroad to provide for their families' necessities. All rates adjust midway between 1960s and 1970s, and clearly, food prices climbed by more than 100% after the 1970s.
Another factor that provides us with a way to assess the alleged golden age is the price of basic goods. The graph shows the annual increase in food prices as well as the non-food item from 1965 to 1986. This gives a measure of the prices of goods purchased by an ordinary Filipino. The graph above shows the dynamic changes of food price index by percentage during the Marcos era. The spikes pertain to the increase of the price index along the timeline. It is apparent that by the year 1968, there was a sudden change of price index. It went up until 1974 where it reached 34% price increase from its recent years. But after that, a sudden drop to 5% happened in 1975 and somehow retained its shallow dynamic changes until 1983, where the price index suddenly went up until 1984. It increased from 8% to 53%, but suddenly went down for the next 2 years. Considering how poverty increased, wages for workers decreased, and prices of goods increased significantly, one gets a clearer picture of the changes in lifestyle experienced by the ordinary Filipino, progressively earning less while all around them, food and other basic needs were getting more and more expensive. One can imagine concretely the real economic impact that the supposed golden age has brought upon the nation.